And I'll probably repeat that, but if you're not familiar, we usually allow about 30 to 60 seconds for the room to fully populate, and then we will get going. We do not have background music though, and I won't sing for you. Okay, let's get started. We have about 58 minutes left, and we could spend 5 hours on this, 5 days, longer. Welcome and good afternoon, everyone. My name, for those of you who don't know, is Danny Schultz, and on behalf of the Westchester Jewish Council and the organization Honest Reporting, I'm honored to be introducing today's event, part of our WJC very successful monthly Israel Connection series. This was not an originally scheduled event, but given the recent events in Israel, Gaza, and the region, and obviously the spillover effects amongst Jewish communities worldwide, we thought this made a lot of sense to bring in Daniel and have him speak to all of you. WJC, as many of you know, is an umbrella organization representing 135 Jewish groups, schools, synagogues, and other organizations in Westchester, the 8th largest Jewish community in the United States, totaling 150,000 citizens. I'm a board member of WJC, chair of our Israel Affairs Committee, and I'm honored to be hosting our guest today. I also do want to acknowledge my good friend Robert Blum for introducing me to Honest Reporting and to Daniel. I don't know if Robert is with us today. I hope so. He recently made Aliyah himself. Now, today's talk will focus on the most recent events in Israel and the region, as I said. Indeed, how it's been presented and perceived here and around the world. Our title, as you know, Israel, Gaza, and the Media, Whose Version? We're joined by Daniel Pomerantz, CEO of Honest Reporting. Daniel hails originally from Chicago, lives now in Neve Tzedek in Tel Aviv. He's been in Israel for 10 years. Being from Chicago, he is a Chicago Blackhawks fan, which is fine by me because anybody who loves hockey is on my good side. Daniel began his career as an attorney in the United States, where he worked for a variety of high-profile law firms in New York and Chicago before starting his own practice and moving to Israel. He also serves on the adjunct faculty at the Interdisciplinary Center, the IDC, in Herzliya, where he teaches at the Adelson School of Entrepreneurship, as well as at Bar-Ilan University School of Management. He is quite accomplished. He is a contributor to Newsweek, the Jerusalem Post, and many other outlets, and is a frequent on-air guest at I-24 News and ILTV News. Daniel holds a BA from University of Illinois, as well as a JD from Georgetown Law School. And as CEO of Honest Reporting, he manages the entire organization. Importantly, its programming, ensuring media accuracy regarding Israel through various critiques, direct coordination with other journalists, missions to Israel, proactive communication on social and traditional media outlets. Honest Reporting takes no political stand and focuses on accuracy and honesty in media. Without further ado, I will introduce you to the CEO of Honest Reporting, Daniel Pomerantz. And one other housekeeping item, use your chat windows for questions as we usually do. I will try and manage those and funnel those because I'm hoping that we have too many to answer. I'll do my best to cover as many as we can on air. We have a lot of ground to cover. And now I will turn it over to you, Daniel. Go right ahead.
Thank you so much, Danny. And thanks everyone for coming. It's really nice to be here. You know, it's been a hard time, I think, for everyone who supports Israel. And whether you're on the right or the left or the center, even people who are sometimes critical of Israel, and the people, by the way, you know, who are the most critical of Israel tend to be Israelis. Our national support is criticizing our government and our country. But, and we just held, you know, more elections, as you know, and we're swearing in a new government. But I always like to say, you don't have, in this world, I don't think you have to be pro-Israel. You just have to be pro-fairness and truth and accuracy. And if you can do that, Israel will stand on its own. That is all that Israel needs, just that bare minimum. And that, unfortunately, sometimes the thing that Israel often doesn't get. Now, I know the events of the last couple of weeks have been confusing for many people. We don't always know what really happened. We know that the news isn't really giving us the full story, and that's where Honest Reporting comes in to try and correct and expose and supplement. And I think also advocacy online and in our communities has gotten difficult because people are saying things that are really strong and emotional and we don't always know what to say back. So I want to see if I can't give you guys a little bit of background that might be useful to help you be able to do some framing in a way that really works, and also to do it while feeling comfortable with yourself and your own personal values. And then maybe we can even take that next step and begin figuring out how to become really savvy consumers of news, both in this situation and moving forward. And the skills that we teach here at Honest Reporting, of course, are relevant to everything, not just this particular topic. I'll start with, it's a question always, where did this start? I mean, you could say, did it start with Sheikh Jarrah and the homes there? Did it start with the TikTok intifada that was going on before, where some Arabs had gotten this idea that they were going to beat people up while posting it on TikTok? Did it start with the years of this tradition of having riots during Ramadan? I mean, you can talk about all that, but for the purposes of this talk, I'll say let's set our starting point at Sheikh Jarrah. You guys know what Sheikh Jarrah is? Some people do, some people don't. So Sheikh Jarrah was these 4 homes, and it's an area in Jerusalem where there were 4 homes that Palestinian families were living in, and they had been living in them for a couple of generations. But before those Palestinians had been living there, there were Jews who had been living there since 1885. And in 1948, when Jordan invaded, they took over that area, either murdered or exiled all the Jews who were living there, and gave those homes to Palestinians. So here we are years later, where there's this painful situation where Palestinians are living there, and it's been their family home for a couple generations, and Jews were living there before, and there was a dispute. And what I find really touching about this, so now we're talking about the media and whose side. I'm going to tell you a side that nobody's hearing in the media. Even a lot of Israelis don't know about this, but everything that I talk about is almost always something that we've written about at Honest Reporting, and we're very diligent about putting links to everything that we write. So if there's anything you want to check out, if you want to source for it, you can go to honestreporting.com, and you can look for links on our in our articles, and use those links to find the original sources. These Palestinian families and these Jewish families recognize that this is a painful situation with no easy answer. If Palestinian families stay there, they've essentially taken these homes by force from Jewish families who feel very connected to it and have memories there. On the other hand, if the Jewish families take it, then you've got these Palestinians who've been living there for a couple of generations and really consider it their home. In a way, it would be sort of like if I went back to Poland and tried to get the home that my grandparents lived in before the Holocaust. Well, the people living there now weren't the people who stole it from anyone, and now they are living in a home that they feel connected to. And what's touching, and what you don't hear because it doesn't fit anyone's narrative, is that both sides felt each other's pain, and both sides understood this was a hard thing, and they came to a compromise. And the compromise was, without getting into all the details, so that basically the Jewish original owners would get title back as the original owners, but the Palestinians would be permitted to keep living there. They would pay rent to the Jewish owners as a sign of the fact that the ownership belonged to the Jews, but they would continue living there as acknowledging the fact that it was now their home. And what happened, and this is what you're really not hearing anywhere, the Palestinian Authority government threatened those Palestinians, saying that if they agreed to this compromise, they would be facing serious personal danger. You remember that the Palestinian Authority government has a law that if you sell land to a Jew, that's punishable by death. That's that penalty is higher than the punishment for rape, is selling land to a Jew. It is literally the worst thing that you can do under Palestinian law. That's the framing we're talking about Jews and Palestinians who felt each other's pain, who saw the past and saw a way forward, who wanted to make a compromise. And it may be a radical thing to say, but I think peace is easier than we realize, because when you see the Palestinian Authority investing so much resources in trying to stop peace, right? The flow is already organically toward peace, and they had to work really hard to prevent it. And that's a framing of the story that we never hear. That's a side that we never hear. Well, after that, the framing that we heard was Israel is evicting Palestinians from their homes, which was really a mischaracterization of what had happened. And the Palestinian Authority sort of got Arab Israelis rioting, and that created a certain amount of violence. And some of that violence was on the Temple Mount in the Al-Aqsa Mosque. They were throwing rocks and Molotov cocktails and using fireworks as weapons. And, you know, there's that famous picture of the Al-Aqsa Mosque on fire. Of course, the mosque wasn't on fire. There was a tree that was on fire from these fireworks that Palestinian rioters had fired. Israeli police entered to try and bring about, restore calm and order. And in doing so, they used non-lethal crowd control methods, things like tear gas, things like flashbangs and that sort of thing. Total number of casualties was exactly 0. Nobody was killed from that. Some people were injured, some people were arrested, but nobody was killed from that. But in the midst of that, Hamas started feeling irrelevant. Hamas had there was almost a Palestinian election. Most of the polls show that Hamas was likely to make significant gains. And then Mahmoud Abbas, the head of the Palestinian Authority government, just canceled the elections. Now, one of the highest values in Western thought is pragmatism and compromise, but one of the highest values in Arab thought is personal dignity. And that's also a very good value, but it's a different one. If you were about to win an election and the other side just canceled that, that is humiliating. And that's a real thorn in the side of Hamas. You cannot afford to be humiliated in an Arab society, in a political situation. So Hamas now sees that the Palestinian Authority prevented the compromise, brought about these riots, and this is after canceling elections. So in a bid to appear relevant, they started firing rockets, originally at Jerusalem, eventually at other places too. And those rockets were firing at Jerusalem, and there's an irony there, and that these rockets are fired indiscriminately. The places in the line of fire include the Al-Aqsa Mosque itself, and the Western Wall, and the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And what's protecting these things is the Iron Dome. So you literally have the Israeli army protecting the Muslim holy sites from Hamas's rocket fire, which is also a complete inversion of the story that we were hearing in the news. Then, of course, that rocket fire, it was hitting Sderot and Ashkelon in very high amounts, but then it also started hitting Tel Aviv in very high amounts as well. And that is what brought us to this conflict. We don't officially call it a war in Israel, but informally, that's what I often refer it to, as this 11-day war. Now, in the process of this war, there were these dueling narratives about, you know, who's being killed on which side, and is it human shields? Is Israel being overly aggressive? There's an important fact that is also missing from the sides of the narrative. It's a side that you're not hearing enough people talk about on either side, and certainly not hearing in the media, which is Hamas fired some 4,000 rockets. Excuse me for a moment. Approximately 680 of them fell short and landed in Gaza. These are rockets that are fired indiscriminately. And that means that we don't actually know how many of the Palestinians who died were killed by Hamas rockets, but it stands to reason that it was most, if not all, because Israeli strikes are two things. One, they're highly precise, and the other is that Israel calls its shot in advance and gives Oh, it seems I somehow got muted. How much of what I said did you miss?
Just the last 10 seconds or so.
Okay. So there was a video that I saw in which Israel had announced a strike on a particular building. And there was a video that was filmed by someone on his camera phone in Gaza with people walking around right near that building, just about a half a block away. And they were filming it with their camera phones to show what was going on. And you could see people were not worried. People knew that if the IDF had said, we are going to hit this building, then they were safe as long as they were not in that building. And you can see from the behavior of civilian people in Gaza and the body language and the way they're nearby, that the people of Gaza know that an Israeli strike does not put them at risk, but those Hamas rockets that are fired indiscriminately do. And, no matter what side you're on, if you are against people getting killed and civilians getting killed, the first question we have to ask is, who is killing them? Because if you don't stop the people who are killing them, or don't at least call them out publicly, they're going to do it again, and they're going to do it more. And if they get a PR victory for doing it, they're going to do it more. So I always like to say, if you're pro-Israel, you should be coming down hard on Hamas. If you're pro-Palestinian, you should be coming down hard on Hamas, and you should be recognizing where the killing's actually coming from. Now, another story that came up recently, that's been in the news just today, was this media building that housed the offices of Associated Press and Al Jazeera, which Israel destroyed. It turned out that that not only was there a Hamas office there, but also that it was a Hamas military intelligence facility that was developing a technology to bypass the Iron Dome system. Now, the position of Associated Press, and this was an Israeli diplomat sat with the CEO of Associated Press today and explained that to him. And the Associated Press's article said, okay, this is what Israel has told us, but we have yet to see any proof. Now, I'm all for fact checking, and I'm all for proof. But one thing I noticed is neither the Associated Press nor anybody else has ever asked Hamas for proof that any Palestinians who died were killed by Israeli strikes as opposed to Hamas's rockets. And if we're asking for proof, this is the most central question, not proof of why Israel blew up an empty building, but proof of who was actually killing Palestinian civilians. And so far, not only has Hamas presented no proof that of Israeli strikes actually being responsible for killing people, but the press has never asked for it. The conversation isn't even out there on the table. And that's a problem in the news that we really need to strongly address. And if people have questions, there's questions about international law and what Israel does or doesn't need to prove in terms of the AP building. But instead of jumping into that now, I'll give you guys a chance to ask it in the questions if it's interesting to you, and then we can get to that later. Because I want to follow the flow of where your thoughts are taking you as well. But that gets us into a question, which is, why is the news not getting it right? And the answer is, I'm going to jump to this question. Someone, I just saw this pop up. I'm going to take questions later, but I am going to take this particular one now. Ron asks, why was the information about this technology that's supposed to stop the Iron Dome not shared earlier? The answer, and I'm sorry to say this, but it's a constant part of my life as an Israeli who advocates for Israel. Our country, my country out here, America is also my country, but this particular country of mine really doesn't get the importance of communicating to the world. There seems to be an attitude here among the older generation. The whole world's against us anyway. The important thing is defense, so we'll just defend ourselves, and who cares what anyone thinks. The younger generation's starting to get it. I'm on actually 2 WhatsApp groups that get hundreds of messages per day of young people looking for help to how to frame this, young Israeli people, and I'm working with them to help them develop tools, and that's part of what we do here at Honest Reporting. But another thing that we do at Honest Reporting is we fill in where the Israeli government is leaving off. The Israeli government just isn't understanding how tremendously important it is, to speak, to communicate. And while there's no obligation for Israel to prove that there were Hamas facilities there, Israel has an obligation to have evidence, but Israel doesn't have an obligation to prove it to the Associated Press. However, that's international law. Let's talk about reality, because there's a difference. I always said this, in America, I was a lawyer for a lot of years. I like to say I'm a recovering lawyer. The first step is admitting that you are a lawyer. And I always like to say there's a difference between law and reality. And the reality is that regardless of what Israel is obligated to do under the laws of war, it would be wise of Israel, if it's going to destroy a media building, to have a statement prepared in advance with some evidence that it can share without disclosing intelligence sources or whatever else needs to be done. And these things come up constantly. One of the heads of the Israel government press office sent an email out about a week into this war saying, yeah, I'm really exhausted and we're short-staffed, so no more press inquiries from now on. It's like, this is the government press office of Israel just saying, yeah, we're not working anymore. A typical attitude of a government employee rather than the attitude of somebody who's living in Israel and has a duty to a duty on a moral level, on a level of the history of the Jewish people. We have a duty to be speaking and to be doing it at the critical times. I was on television a lot in South Africa because the South African Jewish community reached out to the ambassador, and the ambassador said, I'm too busy, I don't have time for it. So they asked someone else who asked someone else who eventually got around to me. And then I ended up doing a lot of the speaking for Israel in South African media and in other places as well. I was doing television appearances 2-3 times a day. And then at night, I was running to bomb shelters. So I wasn't getting any sleep. And then I was waking up in the morning and doing it all over again. It was very exhausting. But I'll tell you what, when you're in a hard situation, it can feel very fulfilling to know that you're doing something meaningful, and it makes you feel maybe not quite so helpless.
Hey, Daniel.
Yeah.
We have plenty of time before we hit questions, but do you have any interviews or any clips of things you've done where either it's been just you or you've been facing some folks from the other side trying to tell a different narrative that are easy enough to share? I'm certain they're on your website. If you have them queued up and ready, great. If not,
they are on our website and they're on our YouTube channel. And since we're doing well on time, maybe I'll show you just a little clip of something. This is a clip where I was actually on, this was a South Africa one. A few minutes before the TV segment, the sirens started going off here. And so I had to run down to the bomb shelter. And so I did the interview on Zoom from my phone from inside a bomb shelter. So let me see if I can pull this up for you. Let's make sure I'm doing it right. Let's see. First thing I have to do is find the segment. Okay, here's the segment. Give me just a moment. Okay, so now that I found this, I'm going to do the screen share and make sure I'm sharing sound. All right, is everyone seeing this? Give me a thumbs up. All right. So I'll show you I won't show you this whole clip, but you can find all this clip and many others on Honest Reporting's website and on Honest Reporting's YouTube channel. On our website, we have a little category called videos. You can clip everything at honestreporting.com. And here you go.
We start with a pro-Israeli group that says that international media is once again conflating the issues. To tell us more, we are joined by Daniel Pomerantz, the CEO of Honest Reporting. Daniel, thank you for joining us this evening. Before we get into the questions, I believe you have just been moved to a bomb shelter. What's going on around you?
That's correct. I'm in Tel Aviv right now. I came to our Tel Aviv office to do this interview. But before the interview could begin, the air raid sirens started sounding, and we were evacuated to this bomb shelter here. Right now, we hear rocket fire above us. We hear booms. Some of it is the missile defense shield, the Iron Dome, and some of it is the rockets itself. There are no military targets in this area. This is like firing rockets on New York City. There's no reason for this rocket fire whatsoever except to attempt to harm civilians.
What then do you think the media
done? That's absolutely living in a home and both compromised and threatened where people on the ground want to make peace.
So here I'm talking about the story of Sheikh Jarrah and reframing the issues in a way that allows me to speak to the idea that I'm supporting the concept of human rights and of people wanting to live in peace, but reframing it in a way that Israel is not. It's not Israel against Palestinians. It's people who believe in peace against terror groups who are trying very hard to undermine that. All right, so now we get to the question of the dueling numbers. And this is one that comes up a lot. So I'll show you how I answered this here.
Talk about the numbers, though. 28 Palestinian casualties, including 10 children, versus 2 Israeli deaths. Does it not become difficult to argue that Israel is not using excessive force?
Well, first of all, those numbers are brought by the Gaza Ministry of Health, which is an arm of Hamas. Hamas is on the terror lists of almost every government in the Western world, the US, UK, European Union. It's not a credible group. It's like getting numbers from ISIS. And at least some of those numbers we've already seen were from rockets that Hamas fired that landed in Gaza. One of them killed 3 children. Roughly a third of Hamas's indiscriminate rocket fire lands right back in Gaza. And Palestinian people are the ones who really suffer from this the most. Israel's strikes are all targeted at military equipment, but Hamas works to hide that equipment in civilian areas, which is a double war crime. They fire at civilians from civilian areas. And right now they're firing not at Israeli military equipment, but simply at Tel Aviv. It's a tragedy that people are dying, but it's a tragedy that Hamas has created for both Jews and Muslims alike.
You can see kind of the way I do the framing, the way I speak through the issues, and the way I try to present it in a way that people of all sides of this political spectrum and people with good hearts can come around and connect with what I'm saying. Now, there are a couple of another thing I wanted to bring up. So we're getting to this question of why does the press get it wrong so frequently? And it depends on the person. You know, the media is made up of thousands of people and hundreds of companies, and different people are different. And certainly it's true that they're under quick deadlines. There's a lot of groupthink. They don't always have access to information quickly enough. But how does the groupthink begin in the wrong direction in the first place? And, you know, Honest Reporting actually did an expose. We discovered that there was a woman who was working for the BBC as a journalist assigned to cover to cover Israel and to cover this conflict. And she had tweeted in the past, Hitler was right and kill all the Jews, or death to Jews, something like that. Now, I don't believe in cancel culture, and I don't believe that she should necessarily be fired or never work again. But maybe somebody who's covering the Jewish state should at the very least not be an actual Nazi. And we're setting the bar really low here, just not a Nazi. If we can at least get to that point, because we're looking to the BBC for unbiased coverage of Israel and Israel's conflict. And the person at the BBC who's presenting this reporting is somebody who's saying Hitler was right and kill all the Jews. I mean, it's not a credible source. Maybe she'd be a perfectly good journalist if she was covering some other topic, horse racing or finance or the economy of Venezuela or something. And we see this come up a lot. So there are people who have agendas, and we do expose them from time to time. And those people with the agendas begin framing the message. And then other journalists who are perhaps well-meaning end up hearing a message and running with it. And another trap people fall into is we often try to think of things that happen in Israel as an analog to the United States. So one example, one question I got was, what about these the Jewish Arab violence that had been going on, and how much of it was going on, and were people arrested? I can tell you that right now, just in recent days, some 1,500 people have been arrested. Approximately 1/3 were Jews, approximately 2/3 were Arab. The vast majority of the violence was Arab against Jewish, but the Jews who were committing violence, that is by no means excusable, and it's something that Israelis feel a lot of pain about. And one thing you won't see in the news is that Israelis had a lot of peace protests together with Arabs marching for peace among Jews and Arabs living in Israel. And it's not something, you know, any country of 9.5 million people with freedom of speech is going to have all types. And some people are peaceful and some people are less so. But the consensus opinion in Israel is one toward peace and coexistence, and you get your niche people as well. But here's an interesting thing. When Israeli police are going into these Arab neighborhoods and arresting people, what happened was a great deal of organized crime. Arab crime gangs in Arab neighborhoods have been terrorizing Arab people in Israel. And Israel has been inadequate in its duty to protect all of its citizens and has not been going into those Arab neighborhoods for years to put a stop to this organized crime. And a lot of the reason these riots happened was because the Palestinian Authority and Hamas were able to make connections with the Arab gang leaders and get them riled up and get them to use their influence to create these riots. This was not nearly as grassroots or organic as it might seem. The reaction from Arabs in Israel has been, number one, it's about time. Number two, why did it take an attack by these Arab gangs against Jews before Israeli police finally did something about it. Now, this is an important contrast because in America, a lot of the conversation you hear is things like defund the police, police-free zones, things like this, right? But the reaction in Israel has been, we want more policing, we want better policing, and the discrimination that we have a problem with in Israel has been that Israel has not been policing enough in our neighborhoods and has been neglecting them and allowing these criminal gangs to grow. So you can see there's a lot more complexity than any of us realize. And it's not analogous to situations in the United States or other places. Israel is its own unique place with its own unique interactions of different people and interests and desires and groups. Finally, I'll just throw this out, a nice messaging that I've heard in America. I don't know if you guys caught that. Richie Torres, who's a Democratic congressman who was on the Bill Maher show, was there talking about how, people in America sometimes try to frame this as a conflict between white Jews against brown and black Muslims. And since all white people are oppressors, Jews must be in the wrong. And he pointed out that, first of all, 20% of Israel's population isn't even Jewish. It's Arabs and also Christians and Druze and Bedouins. And then even among the Jews, more than 50% of Jews are either from North Africa and the Arab world, people from Morocco and Yemen and places like that, Iraq. And then, of course, there are Jews even from Ethiopia who are actual African Jews. And Bill Maher followed that up by saying, and I just love the way he phrases it. He has a gift for phrasing things in a way that's catchy and short and right. And the way he said it was, yeah, only 46% of Israelis look like your dentist. And that was really one of the most special things for me about making Aliyah, was I came to a place where Jews weren't, lox and bagels and gefilte fish and bar mitzvahs. Jews were everything. Jews are people from all parts of the world. Jews are people who do everything from being doctors and lawyers to being fighter pilots and movie stars and athletes. And it's been such a refreshing thing to be here. And at a time when there's a lot of anti-Semitism around the world and Jews have been in danger in every place from LA to New York to Paris to London, I'll tell you, as stressful and difficult a thing as it was to be dodging rocket fire and running to bomb shelters here in Israel, I felt not only safer here, but privileged to be here compared to what people are facing abroad. And I'm by no means one of these people who thinks that everyone should make Aliyah, but I do feel that my heart really goes out to all the Jews around the world who are now facing difficult conversations, as well as in some cases outright violence and anti-Semitism. When people are being attacked on the street, they're not being attacked for being Israeli or for being Zionist, they're being attacked for being Jewish. So we have our work cut out for us, but I also do believe that there are a lot of people out there whose opinions could go either way. They may have an opinion on Israel, but it might not be a very strong one. Some people out there will always agree with you. Some people out there will never agree with you. Most people out there really could go either way. And I think both for the sake of Israel and both for the sake of Jewish communities and the safety of Jews in the world, we now all have a responsibility to engage in that conversation as diligently as we can. In a moment, I'll ask Danny to go to Q&A, but I'll just say this. Honest Reporting is supported entirely by donations. We're a 501c3 in America. We're a registered nonprofit Amutah, as it's called in Israel. We are not supported by the Israeli government or by any government, but the work we do fills in the gaps in a lot of what the Israeli government isn't doing. So I encourage everyone, please come to our website, sign up for our newsletter. We have a newsletter where you can get daily updates, which can give you some of the information and background. I tell you, I have a lot of facts on the tip of my tongue, but if you read our content every day, over time, you start building a broad knowledge base and you can become very competent and confident in your speaking. And then if you also have a philanthropy or people who have philanthropy priorities, please encourage them to consider us, because the work that we do is, I believe, tremendously important and meaningful, and it's not supported by any other means. And so with that, I'll say thank you so much for bringing me into your homes this morning. I almost said this night. Here it's night. And I'll be happy to have Danny come and MC some Q&A for us at this point.
Sure. And we've got lots of great questions, and I think we've got ample time to address virtually all of them. You may be shocked, but one thing I'm going to encourage all of you to do, it may require you to take some high blood pressure medication as well, but I do encourage you, as I've tried to do many years at different times, to follow online in social media and read the exact people who are coming down on us. It is not going to be easy, and you will feel like you need to answer every single person in these feeds, but I would encourage you to go follow Paliroots. I would encourage you to follow other online media outlets that represent the other side, whether you feel they're being disingenuous or whether you feel they have something to say. It is absolutely critical. If anybody on this call is going to feel that they are armed to respond, as opposed to just speaking with each other, if all of us on this call just speak with each other, I don't think that accomplishes much, no offense, but I think we need to hear what is being said to us and about us, not to give it legitimacy, but to understand how we need to frame our answers. Now, with that, one question I did want to kick off with myself, and then I'm going to hit the chat list, is with respect, I want to go back to one of the moments in time in early May, with respect to the quote unquote non-ground invasion of Gaza, and some of the criticism that Israel came under for what either was a genuine mistake or a real sort of media subterfuge. But there is an embedded issue involved there that relates to Israel's reputation with the press and what's changed and how has that changed. So there are two questions in there. One is the actual issue of announcing an invasion that didn't happen. The other is reputationally, what does that do to a lot of the other things we're trying to get across?
Well, I'll tell you, I mean, first of all, in the abstract, there's a difference between what Israel is obligated to do and what it's fair to criticize Israel for versus what we as Israelis and Israeli supporters should be encouraging Israel to do. That is, as we say in Hebrew, me'alu me'ever, that is above and beyond, because I don't think Israel, at least the older generations in Israel, really truly understand how connected we are to the world and how important it is to communicate. And oftentimes it is possible if we would only just take a moment to do that. But what I think I'd like to do is maybe show you, I was asked this exact thing on an interview, which was a somewhat hostile segment. And I think I'm going to
go right ahead, pull that up.
Share that little clip with you. Let's see if I can get myself, I got to make sure I press the right buttons in the right order. Okay, first I'm going to share the screen, share the sound, and are you seeing the new segment here?
Yes, we are.
All right, so this is almost exactly the exact question you just asked, and I'll show you how I answered it on the air in a setting where I have to answer very quickly without much time to think and very succinctly.
Allegations of Israeli disinformation on the ongoing operations in Gaza. Reporters from the Wall Street Journal and the Washington Post claim to have received deliberately misleading communications from officials within the military, specifically saying Israeli soldiers had entered Gaza. Well, that ground operation never materialized. We can now bring in Daniel Pomerantz, CEO of Honest Reporting, a group monitoring global media coverage of Israel. Thank you for joining us on the program. So reporters within Israel are saying the story of a ground operation was a deliberate ruse to trick Hamas. Is that true, do you think?
You know, I don't know if that's true, but I can tell you that when I heard rumors of ground troops entering, I called up several people in the spokesperson's units, as did my team. It took us about 5 minutes to verify that that wasn't true. I think what we may have here is an example of journalists doing what they've been doing throughout this conflict, which is running with the story that they want to tell. A dramatic story of a ground invasion beats a story of a press release that they misunderstood. But a basic confirmation would have would have revealed that that wasn't the case.
So do you think that many Western media outlets simply take Israeli government statements at face value without subjecting them to proper scrutiny?
No, I think that they take statements at face value that they want to believe. They want to believe in a ground invasion. Another thing they want to believe is that Israel is killing Palestinians. That's patently false. Hamas is killing Palestinians. Okay, and then I get into some of that same framing that we talk about, which is Hamas is killing Palestinians. But there's definitely truth to the idea that there are certain stories that are easy to write, that are easy to sell, that get a lot of clicks, and that maybe fit the groupthink that people have, and they gravitate toward those. I don't know for sure if someone in the IDF spokesperson's unit said something that was misleading or that was an outright lie, but what I do know for sure is that when I heard the rumors, and I heard them, by the way, before they got published in the press, I immediately reached out to the same IDF spokespeople that all the journalists have access to, and I learned in 5 minutes that there wasn't a ground invasion. So my inclination is to believe that some journalists ran with the story they wanted to tell. But like I said, Israel does have to go above and beyond and really recognize that we have an obligation to fight this media war. And that means not just thinking about what we can do, but what would be most effective for us to do. Thanks, Danny. That's a good question.
Yeah, and I'm gonna now turn to some of the questions we've got in the feed here. The world would be off balance if we didn't take Ron Burton's question. So the question is the mainstream, as opposed to the partisan media in Israel, siding with the Bennett-Lapid coalition?
That's a really interesting question. I'd say the mainstream on the whole is supportive of this coalition, mostly where you hear the Bibi statements are in places like Channel 20, which is sort of like a very right-leaning outlet. But for the most part, the media tends to be, if not supportive of the coalition, at least supportive of the idea that this is a coalition that was formed in the appropriate democratic way and that this is the direction the country is going in. Now, I'll clue you in on something. There is a very small possibility that this could still get torpedoed before it's finally finalized on Sunday. And that's actually what happened when Shimon Peres was supposedly formed a coalition back in, I think it was 1995. And then they managed to, Bibi managed to flip one person at the very last minute. And he's attempting to do that now. But so far, it looks like the coalition is holding, but we'll know for sure on Sunday.
Right. And I'm going to jump around a little bit, but there is a good question here, I feel, regarding the barriers around the Damascus Gate earlier on in the beginning of the conflict, from Sarah W. The impression given by journalists is that they were put in for no good reason. I'm sure there was a good reason, but it hasn't been specified. Now, I've heard some reasons, but it's a hot temperature time in Israel. Ramadan. It is a hot emotional time. You have a lot of people in one narrow, small space. A lot of things can be misinterpreted. But can you touch on the sort of barricades at Damascus Gate, if you feel qualified?
Well, Damascus Gate tends to be a bit of a flashpoint. It's an entrance to the old city that leads into the Arab quarter, as opposed to the Jaffa Gate, which leads into the Jewish quarter. And a lot of times when you hear about some violent thing happening in the old city, it's usually in around the Damascus Gate. It reminds me of the time, I don't have a lot of detail, but it reminds me very much of the time back when when Israel put metal detectors outside the Al-Aqsa Mosque, because there had been a shooting on top of the mosque. And there was this whole, story, Israel's not allowing access. Well, Israel is allowing access. Israel's just requiring metal detectors, which, by the way, you have to go through to get to the Western Wall. You got to go through metal detectors. You also have to go through metal detectors to get into a shopping mall in Israel or most other places. It's a very common tool. And it sort of raises the question, well, what's actually the problem? Are you saying that if you can't go into the mosque with your gun, then there's no point in praying at all? And the truth is that a lot of Palestinians who were looking to pray peacefully were quite supportive of that measure, because it meant that they could enter the mosque and pray without having to worry that someone was going to go in and shoot up the place. And but you don't hear that side because it doesn't make it into the narrative. And these days, news is sort of all about narrative. But all of the measures that we see in and around the old city are limited, they're targeted, they're temporary. and they do not on the whole block access, but either limit access to certain checks or limit access from a certain entrance, but then there's another entrance right nearby that you could get through.
Right. And let me also ask, from where you sit, you've shown us a couple of pieces that are on RT. You've mentioned being on South African media, maybe, if I'm not mistaken, Australian media as well. Not clear from what you've said how much, how in the way of inroads you've had into U.S. media outlets. It would seem some of these topics are, perfect 60-minute pieces. Where is the net catching the story and your ability to maybe get some of this out more broadly in the US? Where do you think the bottleneck is, if there is one? That's sort of a question that was asked. And is there more of a push to try to be able to actually make inroads, less so in Europe perhaps and other places, but here in the US on major news outlets?
Yeah, there absolutely is. And, in some of our work, for example, our expose of the BBC reporter did get picked up by some mainstream outlets. We had a recent piece exposing some of the interaction between UNRWA, the UN organization, and Hamas that got picked up in mainstream US news, citing us as a source. But one thing that we really want to be doing is having our spokespeople and having me speaking in those mainstream forums on CNN, on Christiana Amanpour, on MSNBC, on 60 Minutes. And in the TED Talks and in the 92nd Street Y. And we haven't managed to crack in just yet. And we're strategizing on ways to do that. If anyone in this group has some inroads, whether it's, bookers and producers, or whether a really good PR agent. A lot of PR agents say that they're good because they like to promote themselves. But if you know someone who's really good and has a record of success, I would be absolutely happy to have your input and your help. We run on not only donations, but also on the real world pragmatic support of people who can help us with things you can do or people So if you want to reach out to me, you can reach out to Danny and he can get you in touch with me, and I would be certainly happy to have that help.
All right, very interesting. Talk a little bit about the online presence that you've got now at Honest Reporting. Are you working on building up, your own following on, Instagram, dare I say TikTok? Who's doing that work for you? It takes a particular set of skills, I would say. Maybe I'm just saying that given my age, but how are you trying to also move off of the website approach and try to really push media out into a bigger, wider distribution channel, and like how much, followers, etc.?
It reminds me of that movie. I'm forgetting the name. The guy who played Schindler's List, and the guy kidnaps his daughter, and he gets on the phone. He says, "I have a very particular set of skills," and just sort of reminded me of that.
Liam Neeson.
Liam Neeson, that's right. He has a very particular set of skills. Yes, it's true. You need a very particular set of skills. We're very active on Twitter. We've got about 40,000 followers. We're active on Facebook. We have a YouTube program where we promote the videos, and oftentimes our videos will get views in the millions or 2 million, and we will beat out CNN's primetime ratings by putting promotion, and the promotion allows us to specifically target who we want, like people who are between the ages of 18 to 35, living in these areas, watching these news sources. TikTok we haven't gotten involved with yet, but Instagram, we have an Instagram channel, and only just this week we've started really beginning to build it up because we're seeing that this has a lot of upside potential for us as well. So we're very active in these media, but what really gets us is, we're actually also looking to bring on a social media coordinator. We have some people with some skills, but we want to bring on a full-time person who focuses only on that. We're now in a growth mode. I don't know if you knew that. We've existed for 21 years. We began during the first intifada or the second intifada, but now we recently are really just growing significantly in the last 3 years. we have a lot of upside there and a lot of work to do, but we're already seeing the results and the progress from it. But what really gets us is when we find some really good content, an original piece of research or a new way of framing that's captivating. It makes the work of the social media experts that much easier, and it gets shared around all over the place. And we do have those successes from time to time.
Right, right. So a question that's been framed a couple of different ways, and you and I have talked a little bit about it, but Steve Handelsman is raising the question in general on anti-Israel bias. And even if one might argue that it's not biased, there's certainly some real problems at the Times and the New York Times, the Post, NPR, PBS, the Guardian, BBC. We all know about the cover piece at the New York Times showing the young children that were killed and some of the inaccuracies in there. There's too much as a fire hose of inaccuracy today, and too much for you to handle maybe. But can you address at least that particular New York Times issue, but also more broadly, where do you find you have allies? Newsweek takes a different slant, I and many have noticed. But where are you getting a hearing? And again, where do you find that not getting a hearing is based on either not having gotten to the right people or getting to the right people who, again, are not interested in promoting your narrative?
Yeah, it's a good question. I've been seeing questions flash on the screen for a second, by the way. I just want to answer this. If you're looking to find us on social media, go to honestreporting.com, and there are links to all of our social media there, so you can find us there. And my name on Twitter and Instagram is Daniel Speaks Up, one word. On Twitter, you can see some things that I write, and on Instagram, you can see some things that I ate. That's what we use it for, right? I made a really nice meal the other day. I took a picture of it. So it's a big question. I think, first of all, you want to get out there with the right framing, and that's what's really important. And there's this sort of woke generation that people frame everything in the language of oppressor versus oppressed, and all white people are oppressors and all Jews are white. And at every stage of that chain of logic, there are problems. But rather than try and debate about it, let's just say, hey, okay, let's jump in and see if we can communicate in a way that works. And so some of this framing is talking about the shared pain in Sheikh Jarrah. By the way, someone asked, yes, we did write about that on our website, and you can find, there's an article that I wrote on it called, I think the title is The War You Aren't Seeing. And that's on Honest Reporting's website, and it has some background on that. Things like Hamas is killing Palestinians in the same way that ISIS and Bashar Assad are killing Syrians. If you care about Syrians, it's not coalition forces against Syrians. It's the whole world against Bashar Assad and ISIS, who include Syrians or who are Syrians, but they are in turn also killing Syrians. So if you get into the right framing, you can focus in that way and find a messaging that will be more well received. I think a lot of networks might not want to have someone on that doesn't share their point of view, but you may have noticed that Netanyahu was on Meet the Press, I think it was. Naftali Bennett was on CNN. I know that he canceled an ABC news appearance 2 hours before, which you really shouldn't do, or you should at least send it to someone else like me. Even when people like Bennett speak, he's speaking in a way that's designed to attract Israeli voters. He wants to speak in a way that makes Israelis go, yeah, boy, you stuck it to the man, and gave those American journalists a real metaphorical punch in the face. But what he's not doing, and that may be great if you want to get votes in an Israeli election, but what we need as a country and as a Jewish people around the world is someone who's going to go on there and frame it in a way that changes hearts and minds. And so I know that it's possible to get on there. The question is, how do we convince someone like Naftali Bennett, for example, to say, if you're going to cancel on ABC, at least send it to me, don't just cancel. And how do also we convince people like the producers at ABC or CNN to say, hey, instead of going to Naftali Bennett because you want to get someone who's a firebrand and say you gave the Israeli side, why don't you send it to someone who has a real sense of depth and framing and knows how to communicate to American audiences? And that's what we're working on.
Yeah, understood, and much appreciated. I think we've got a few minutes left, and people are suggesting that you get on Bill Maher as well. But
I would love to be. I've admired Bill Maher for years. I admired him back in 2009 when he spoke about that Gaza war, and I always like his humor. And if I can get on there, I will be just thrilled, and I'll be happy to have all of you watching it.
Yeah. Let me ask you one last question, and I'll leave it for you to wrap up. Which, and again, a question that has been repeated here, but on Israel's own government and military PR, how does let's just call it Israel's PR, public sector, not private sector, which is what you are, work with you and others, or are these sort of, are you a very separate vertical and slice doing your thing, and the Israeli government is pursuing its own PR mission? And where is is there communication between the Israeli government public sector PR effort and everybody trying to make some efforts out of the private sector? And I'm calling you private sector. I know you're a 501c3, but I think everybody understands the question. So let me leave it at that and understand what kind of cross-fertilization there is on those issues.
Yeah, look, the good news is that we are very much in touch. We're constantly communicating. We go to conferences together. We meet with each other privately. Some of us are personal friends. We are really, we have relationships. And also, I have relationships with the people who I know are good and are motivated, as to, maybe the top person might have a fancy title, but is not as motivated as maybe the younger person who I happen to know from a conference who's really a firecracker. We're also good friends with the folks in the New York consulate out in your neighborhood. And so we are connected and talking, but unfortunately, a significant part of our job is convincing the Israeli official sector to take certain things more seriously, to get certain information out quicker, to have certain things ready in advance. And often we're fighting against a certain inertia or a certain lack of understanding as to why it matters. And so that is another part of our job, is both pushing them to do better, filling in for them when they're not doing better, but also the good news is we do often coordinate when there is a need and help them get messages out, or provide them with forums and channels when they need those.
Right. I guess one last question as they're streaming in here, does Honest Reporting ever work with Stand With Us and Camera? I know both of those organizations do slightly different things. And before you even hit that, I noticed that Mr. Horowitz seems very worked up about an issue where he feels that we're feeding everybody here disinformation, more evil disinformation that is being fed elsewhere. So I'm not sure I agree with that. And Mr. Horowitz, I'm happy to have a nice conversation with you. Daniel, have you had to respond to also criticism also of the angle that Honest Reporting, I guess, is taking to some degree, if I understand the more benevolent angle of the comment being made?
Well, look, some people, there's always critics out there, but what we do is, we feel very comfortable standing on our own 2 feet and saying, hey, we provide links and backup and sources to everything we write. If the first step is think about what I'm saying and whether it makes logical sense. And I don't think there's anything I've said here today that does not make logical sense on its face. And then the other question is, if you want to check up on us, everything we do is very robustly supported. And so anyone who is at all suspicious or curious can always click through to our links and verify the things that we say. So at the end of the day, the proof is in the pudding, and we try to provide as much proof we can. We're friendly with all the organizations. We coordinate with all of them. There are some minor areas of low overlap between us and, say, Stand With Us or Camera or Memory or Palestinian Media Watch. But at the end of the day, there's a great deal that we do that's a sort of a Venn diagram, and there's a little slice in the middle. But there's a lot that we do that is different. I'd say the main difference between us and most organizations is that we have a very specific media focus. We know the journalists and the outlets and all of the people out there. We really are, as they say, inside baseball when it comes to journalism. And we're frequently on the phone with specific journalists. And then Camera does a certain media focus as well, but we have a much wider focus in the proactive areas. We have an entire department that does nothing but set up press conferences and field tours. Like during this conflict, they put a bunch of journalists on a bus, brought them down to the Gaza border to speak to local residents who are under rocket fire. And then, of course, appearing on television and doing these original YouTube videos. That's a whole area that we cover that no one else who is focused in media is also doing. Now, Stand With Us also does some of that proactive content, but it's more general Hasbara-ish kind of content. So while there's some Venn diagram overlap, we do occupy a unique and I think really critically important space that's becoming really more important by the day now.
And I know we've run over a minute or two, but last but not least, who do you find, and have you reached out, or do you have any what I just simplistically call allies, quote, on the other side, that you can be maybe jointly booked? They don't. When I say allies, I don't mean everybody has to agree on everything, but maybe I'm not framing the question right, but A, allies, and then B, folks on the other side who are, shall we say, talking a more reasonable talk. And have you ever gotten yourself on Al Jazeera?
I haven't been on Al Jazeera myself, although I have colleagues who have, and I may be on it in the future. I have been on RT, as you noticed, which tends to be very hostile toward Israel. And so some of these hostile networks, I think it's a great place to speak because they're never going to correct their stories or issue a retraction just because we ask them to, because they just don't care. But if I can actually appear on the network, then that's the one way that I can speak my piece to their followers directly. And if I say it in a way that's sensible and thoughtful and compelling and makes sense, it may at least open some minds and get people to think through again. In terms of the other side, I'm not sure exactly, that can mean different things. One other side is the side of journalists. So we're critiquing them and they're on the other side. So we have people there. Another side is, there's Arab Israelis, there's Palestinians who frequently are critical of the Palestinian government. If you guys ever read Khaled Abu Toameh, who writes for the Jerusalem Post, he brings all kinds of interesting information for us. That, I said in an interview recently that Khaled had written about how 43 Palestinians in Gaza had been arrested for the crime of spreading rumors. And we don't know what's going to happen to them, but in all likelihood, it's going to be something really horrific. And then, I come out and say, hey, who's speaking up for those Palestinians? Because if the way you defend Palestinians is by defending the very terror organization that's throwing them off of rooftops, you're not defending Palestinians. It would be like defending Syrians by supporting Bashar Assad. And so we need to, all of us, reframe what it means to be on a side. We need to be on the side of people who believe and care about peace and coexistence against those groups who are investing tremendous resources to try and prevent it. And if we can change that framing, I really do believe we can change the world.
Well, we've run over a little bit. I've tried to bring in as many, if not all, the questions we've had here in some fashion. So, look, Daniel, thank you very much. Again, maybe repeat the website, and hopefully we'll see you again in calmer times when we have a little more success on the PR side.
Well, I very much hope that I'll get to be with you in person, hopefully even in the months to come. And that's honestreporting.com. Sign up for our newsletter, get our information, consider us in your philanthropic planning. And if you have some real meaningful relationships that could be helpful for messaging, please do think of us.
תודה רבה לך.
בבקשה, לילה טוב לכולם.
Thank you.